The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of Kowloon Park, casting dappled shadows across the worn pathways where families strolled and children laughed. It was March 1972, and the air carried the scent of jasmine mixed with street vendor smoke from the nearby Temple Street markets. Bruce Lee sat alone on a weathered bench near the lotus pond, watching koi drift beneath lily pads. At 31 years old, he stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighing 135 pounds. Small by Western standards, unremarkable to those who didn't know better, he wore simple clothes that afternoon. Dark slacks, a fitted white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle that moved beneath his skin like cables under tension. His black hair, normally styled for film work, fell naturally across his forehead. Dark sunglasses concealed eyes that missed nothing. He came here when he could, stealing moments between the exhausting production schedule of The Way of the Dragon. The film was consuming him. Directing, choreographing, starring, writing, every frame demanded perfection. Every movement needed to express philosophy through action. The pressure built like steam in a sealed vessel, and places like this offered the only release valve he trusted. Silence, the simple act of breathing while the world moved around him unaware. An elderly woman fed breadcrumbs to pigeons near the fountain. Two men played Chinese chess under a banyan tree, their pieces clicking against wood with sharp, decisive sounds. A young couple walked hand in hand, their fingers intertwined, lost in whispered conversation. Normal life, the kind of ordinary peace that fame had stolen from him. Bruce closed his eyes, letting the ambient sounds wash over him. His breathing slowed, deepened. 4 seconds in through the nose, hold, 6 seconds out through pursed lips. The meditation technique his Sifu had taught him decades ago in Hong Kong, before Hollywood, before stardom, before the world decided it needed to know his name. In this moment, he was simply a man on a bench, feeling sunlight warm his face, listening to wind rustle through bamboo. He didn't notice the woman at first. She appeared at the park's eastern entrance, walking with the purposeful stride of someone late for an appointment. Mid-20s, wearing a blue floral dress that swayed with each step, carrying a leather purse tucked under her arm. Her heels clicked against the concrete path, sharp, rhythmic, urgent. She glanced at her watch, quickening her pace as she cut through the park toward the MTR station on the opposite side. A shortcut, a decision that would change everything in the next 3 minutes. Bruce opened his eyes, though he didn't turn his head. Peripheral awareness, one of the first lessons of Jeet Kune Do: see without looking. Observe without focusing. The woman passed 30 feet away, her shadow stretching long across the grass in the afternoon light. Something in her hurried movement registered in his consciousness. Not alarm, just observation. A mental note filed and forgotten, until the second figure appeared. He emerged from behind a cluster of palm trees near the maintenance shed, his movements predatory and deliberate. Tall, maybe 6 feet, heavy build running to fat around the middle but still dangerous. 40-ish, wearing a stained tank top and work pants, with a face weathered by sun and street life. His eyes tracked the woman with the focused intensity of a hunter who'd spotted prey. He glanced left, then right, checking for witnesses, for interference, for anyone who might care enough to act. His gaze passed over Bruce on the bench and dismissed him immediately, just another small Chinese man resting. Irrelevant. Invisible. The mugger moved. Bruce watched him cross the grass, angling to intercept the woman where the path curved behind a thick grove of bamboo. A blind spot from the main walkways, hidden from the chess players and the elderly woman with her pigeons. Smart. He'd done this before. Knew the park's geography, understood sightlines and concealment. This wasn't opportunistic desperation, this was practiced predation. The woman remained oblivious, her attention fixed on her watch, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Perhaps a job interview waited. Maybe a sick relative, some appointment that mattered enough to make her hurry through an unfamiliar shortcut instead of taking the longer, safer route. Life's small decisions, unknowingly tipping toward violence. Bruce stood. The movement was liquid, effortless, no wasted motion, no telegraphed intention. One moment seated, the next upright. His weight balanced perfectly over his center line. He removed his sunglasses, folding them carefully and placing them on the bench. His expression remained calm, almost serene. But his eyes, those eyes that had stared down cameras and captivated millions, now fixed on the unfolding scene with the focused precision of a surgeon preparing to cut. He began walking. Not running, not rushing, just moving with quiet purpose across the grass, his footsteps making no sound despite the dry earth beneath him. The chess players didn't notice. The elderly woman continued tossing breadcrumbs. The young couple remained lost in their private world, but Bruce closed the distance, 30 feet, becoming 20, becoming 10. The mugger reached the woman just as she entered the bamboo grove. His hand shot out, thick fingers closing around her purse strap. He yanked hard, the sudden violence shocking in its casualness. The woman gasped, stumbling sideways, her free hand flying up to keep balance. Her mouth opened to scream, but fear strangled the sound in her throat, reducing it to a choked whimper. The mugger's other hand rose, balled into a fist, cocked back near his shoulder. A threat, a promise. His voice came out in rough Cantonese, slurred by alcohol and aggression. Give it now, don't make noise. The woman's eyes went wide, pupils dilated with terror. Her fingers clutched the purse instinctively, that irrational attachment to possessions overriding survival instinct. She tried to pull back, her heels skidding on loose gravel. The mugger's face twisted with irritation. His fist moved forward. Bruce arrived. The word arrived fails to capture what happened. He didn't run up, didn't charge in with theatrical flourish. He simply appeared in the space beside them, materializing like smoke taking form. His presence announcing itself through pure physical reality, rather than sound or warning. His voice emerged quiet, almost conversational, speaking Cantonese with the native fluency of his Hong Kong childhood. Let her go. The mugger's head snapped around, his expression cycling through surprise, then confusion, then contempt. He saw what everyone saw initially. A small man, slight build, movie star, pretty face. Someone who should mind his business, someone who could be handled. The woman seized the distraction, yanking backward hard enough to break the mugger's grip on her purse. She stumbled away, 3 steps, then 5, putting distance between herself and violence. But she didn't run. Something kept her there, feet rooted to earth, unable to look away from whatever was about to unfold. The mugger turned fully toward Bruce, squaring his shoulders. Up close, the size difference became stark. He outweighed Bruce by at least 60 pounds, towered over him by 4 or 5 inches. His hands were scarred and calloused, fighters' hands, or at least brawlers' hands. Hands that had broken noses and knocked out teeth in street confrontations where survival mattered more than technique. He laughed. The sound came out wet, phlegmy, laced with chemical courage from whatever he'd been drinking. His words dripped with mocking dismissal. You wanna be hero, little man. You think this is movie, you think you Bruce Lee or something? The irony hung in the air, invisible to everyone but Bruce himself. His face remained expressionless. No smile, no anger, no indication that the words carried any meaning whatsoever. He simply stood there, weight distributed perfectly, hands loose at his sides, breathing steady and slow. Walk away now while you can. The mugger's face flushed dark. Humiliation burned through alcohol haze, that toxic male rage triggered by disrespect from someone smaller, someone weaker, someone who didn't know his place. His hands curled into fists. His jaw clenched. The violence that had been threat became promise. I'm going to teach you, mind your business. He lunged forward, throwing a wide, looping right hand, the kind of punch that works in bars against drunk opponents, all power and no precision. His fist cut through air where Bruce's head had been a microsecond earlier. Bruce had shifted, not dramatically, just a subtle weight transfer that moved his center line precisely 3 inches left. The punch passed by his ear close enough to feel air displacement. The mugger stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him past his target. His eyes widened as his brain registered the miss as surprise short-circuited aggression. He tried to recover, tried to set his feet, tried to bring his hands up. 3 seconds, that's all it took. Bruce moved. His right hand struck first, an open palm thrust to the solar plexus delivered with a sharp exhalation, and the explosive power of his entire body compressed into a single point of contact. The sound was distinctive, a hollow thwop like a hand slapping wet clay. The mugger's forward momentum stopped as if he'd run into an invisible wall. Air exploded from his lungs in a shocked wheeze. Before the larger man could process pain, before his nervous system could even report the damage, Bruce's left leg swept his front ankle. Not a kick, not a strike, just a perfectly timed hook that removed the foundation. Beneath him, physics and biology conspired against the mugger. His weight, his size, his confidence all became liabilities. He fell. Bruce guided the descent with his left hand, controlling the collapse, ensuring the mugger's head didn't crack against stone pathway. Even in combat, even against predatory violence, he measured his response with surgical precision. The mugger landed hard on his back, the impact driving remaining air from his lungs, leaving him gasping like a fish on dry land. Bruce stood over him, one foot positioned near the mugger's shoulder, ready to pin if he tried to rise. But there was no resistance. The fight had been extracted from him as efficiently as poison from a wound. He lay there, eyes unfocused, mouth working soundlessly, face transitioning from angry red to sick gray as his body tried to remember how breathing functioned. 3 seconds from first punch to final position. 3 seconds to dismantle threat and restore order. The parts seemed to inhale, sound rushing back like water into a vacuum. Birds resumed singing. Wind stirred bamboo leaves. The chess players had abandoned their game, standing now as pieces clutched forgotten in their red. Hands staring at the scene with identical expressions of shock. The elderly woman had turned from her pigeons, one hand pressed against her chest, as if to keep her heart from escaping. The young couple stood frozen mid-step, the woman's hand covering her mouth, the man's eyes wide with the recognition that violence had erupted 10 feet from their romantic afternoon, that the boundary between peace and predation was thinner than they'd ever imagined. And the woman, the intended victim, the catalyst for this brief storm, remained rooted where she'd stumbled, her purse clutched to her chest, mascara beginning to run as delayed shock triggered tears she couldn't control. Bruce looked down at the mugger, his voice calm and empty of judgment. You made a choice, now you face consequence. This is the only teaching I'll give you today. Tomorrow, you can choose differently. He stepped back, giving space, offering dignity even to someone who had temporarily forfeited claim to it. The mugger rolled onto his side, coughing, one hand pressed against his stomach where Bruce's strike had landed. His eyes, when they finally focused, held something beyond pain, recognition, perhaps. The understanding that he'd attacked someone so far beyond his capability that the confrontation hadn't even qualified as a fight. It had been a lesson, a correction, a reality adjustment, delivered with surgical precision. Bruce turned toward the woman. She flinched slightly, instinctive recoil from male movement in the wake of violence. But his expression held nothing threatening. Concern? Yes. Compassion. The face of someone who understood trauma's aftershocks, who recognized that survival didn't end when physical threat departed. His voice softened, Cantonese flowing with gentle formality. Are you hurt? Did he harm you before I arrived? She shook her head, unable to form words. Her hands trembled against her purse, adrenaline demanding release through movement. Tears streamed freely now, silent crying that had nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with how quickly safety had vanished, how close she'd come to something her mind refused to fully process. Bruce reached into his pocket, withdrawing a clean handkerchief, old-fashioned courtesy from a man raised with traditional values. He offered it, not stepping closer, letting her decide whether to accept. After 3 heartbeats, she extended a shaking hand and took it, pressing the cloth against her eyes. You're safe now. He won't follow. Take your time, breathe. There's no hurry anymore. The elderly woman approached, her small frame carrying surprising authority. She spoke rapid Cantonese, scolding the mother who still lay groaning on the ground. Calling him everything from useless turtle egg to shame of his ancestors, her words carried the weight of grandmother disapproval. That uniquely devastating combination of disappointment and prophecy that no amount of physical punishment could match. One of the chess players had already moved toward the park entrance, presumably to find police. The other remained nearby, his expression cycling between admiration and disbelief as he stared at Bruce. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, words emerged, hesitant and awestruck. I know you. I saw your movie The Big Boss my son made me watch. You're really him. You're actually Bruce Lee. Bruce smiled slightly, the expression tinged with resignation. So much for anonymous peace in public spaces. So much for being simply a man on a bench, watching coy. The young couple had approached now, adding their presence to the growing cluster of witnesses. The woman couldn't stop staring at the mugger, then at Bruce, then back, as if trying to reconcile the size difference with the effortless victory she'd witnessed. Her boyfriend looked like someone who'd just had fundamental assumptions about reality challenged. The victim had recovered enough to speak, her voice raw but steadying. Thank you, I can't, he was going to hurt me if you hadn't. She stopped, the sentence dying as her throat closed around implications too frightening to verbalize. Bruce shook his head gently. Don't follow that thought, it didn't happen. You're here, whole, safe, that's the only truth that matters now. But something in his voice carried deeper meaning, layers beneath surface comfort. He glanced down at the mugger, who had managed to sit up, still cradling his stomach, eyes now fixed on the ground as if hoping invisibility might still be achieved through not looking. Bruce's voice changed timbre, taking on instructional weight, speaking not to the woman, but to the morning's aggressor. You chose violence because you believed size gave you power, because you thought desperation justified predation. Because no one had shown you the difference between strength and cruelty. He paused, letting words settle like sediment. Real power isn't taking what you want from those weaker than you. It's having the capability to destroy someone and choosing not to. It's winning and still extending your hand to help them stand. The mugger's head lifted slightly, confusion mixing with lingering pain in his expression. Bruce crouched down, bringing himself to eye level, his voice dropping to something almost intimate, meant primarily for the man before him but audible to everyone present. I could have broken your jaw, shattered your knee, ended your ability to walk normally. Any of these things would have been justified after you attacked innocent person, but I didn't. Do you understand why? The mugger shook his head, a small, uncertain movement. Because breaking you would be easy. Teaching you, that's the difficult path, that's the worthy challenge any man with training can destroy. A master knows when not to. He stood, offering his hand. The mugger stared at it as if it might be trap, some elaborate setup for additional punishment. But Bruce's expression held no deception, only patient waiting. Finally, cautiously, the larger man accepted the offered help. Bruce pulled him upright, steady and strong despite the weight difference, demonstrating once again that size measured nothing important. Once vertical, the mugger swayed slightly, still recovering. Bruce kept one hand on his elbow until balance returned. The gathered witnesses watched in stunned silence, trying to process this inversion of expected narrative. The victor helping the defeated, the hero extending compassion to the villain. Bruce spoke again, voice carrying across the small crowd. Violence answered with equal violence creates only circles. Pain repaying pain changes nothing. But if I can stop your attack and offer you path forward, that creates possibility. That plants seed for different choice next time desperation comes. The mugger's eyes glistened. Pride warred with shame across his features, the internal battle visible in micro-expressions flickering too fast to name, but impossible to miss. His voice emerged, broken, barely audible. I have no money, no job, my family, I don't know how to... His words trailed into silence, heavy with confession. With the weight of circumstances that didn't justify his actions, perhaps explain the desperation driving them. Bruce nodded slowly, acknowledging without excusing. Then tomorrow, go to the community center on Sayong Choi Street. Ask for Master Chen. Tell him Bruce Lee sent you. He'll help you find work, real work, honest work. He paused, his voice hardening slightly. But if I hear you've attacked anyone else, if you return to this predatory behavior, our next meeting will be very different. Do you understand? The mugger nodded rapidly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by something raw and honest and small. He looked at the woman he'd attacked, his mouth working soundlessly for several seconds before words finally emerged. I'm sorry, what I did was there's no excuse, I'm sorry. The woman didn't respond, still processing, still integrating trauma and rescue and this strange theatrical redemption unfolding before her. But she nodded once, sharply, acknowledging if not forgiving. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The chess player who'd gone for help must have found officers nearby. The mugger's eyes widened with panic, but Bruce shook his head. Don't run, face what you've done. Accept consequence. That's where change begins and accountability, not escape. The mugger nodded again, defeated but somehow lighter, as if confession had released pressure he'd been carrying for longer than today's attempted crime. The police arrived 3 minutes later. 2 officers, middle-aged and professional, their hands resting on their batons but not drawing them as they assessed the scene. Weapons weren't needed. The threat had been neutralized, the situation contained, the victim stood safe, the witnesses clustered nearby, and the perpetrator waited, not fleeing. Meeting justice with bowed head and empty hands. The senior officer recognized Bruce immediately. His eyes widened fractionally before professional composure reasserted itself, but admiration flickered across his features like lightning behind clouds. Mr. Lee, we received a report of assault. Can you tell us what happened? Bruce recounted the incident with precise, unemotional accuracy. Just facts. No embellishment, no heroic narrative. The woman added her testimony, voice steadier now, describing the attack and the intervention that had saved her. The witnesses confirmed everything, their accounts overlapping seamlessly, painting clear picture of predator, victim, and defender. The police took the mugger into custody, cuffing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. But as they led him toward their car, Bruce called out, "Officer, one thing more." The senior officer paused, turning back with questioning expression. Bruce approached, speaking quietly enough that only the police and the mugger could hear. This man needs help, not just punishment. Addiction, maybe. Desperation, certainly. If the courts allow, rehabilitation would serve society better than simple incarceration. The officer's expression softened slightly. He nodded once, acknowledging the request without promising outcomes he couldn't control. But the gesture mattered, the seed planted, one man advocating for another man's redemption, even after violence, even after threat. The police car pulled away, carrying the mugger toward whatever consequence and possibility waited beyond this afternoon. The crowd began dispersing, the dramatic tension released, mundane life reasserting its claims. The chess players returned to their game. The elderly woman resumed feeding pigeons. The young couple walked on, though they kept glancing back, as if afraid the moment might disappear if not frequently. Verified, the woman approached Bruce one final time, his handkerchief still clutched in her hand. She held it out, but he shook his head gently. Keep it, consider it, reminder that strangers can be kind, that help exists, that you survived. Her eyes filled again, but she smiled through tears, nodding with fierce gratitude she couldn't articulate. She bowed slightly, a traditional gesture of respect, then walked toward the park exit, her stride more cautious now but still purposeful, still moving toward whatever appointment had seemed so urgent 30 minutes earlier. Bruce returned to his bench. The koi still drifted beneath lily pads, indifferent to human drama. The sun continued its westward arc, shadows lengthening, but afternoon not yet surrendered to evening. He sat in the same position, same posture, breathing, returning to meditation, rhythm. But the peace had changed quality. No longer a stolen moment of anonymity. Now it carried awareness, the knowledge that fame meant visibility, that skill created responsibility, that strength demanded choosing when and how to deploy it. He thought about the mugger's face in that moment of recognition, not just recognizing Bruce Lee the actor, but understanding he'd attacked someone whose capability existed on an entirely different plane than his own. That gap between perceived reality and actual reality, how many people walk through life making assumptions based on appearance, on size, on surface-level judgment? He thought about the choice he'd made, not just to intervene, which felt instinctive, but to extend mercy afterward. That second choice, harder than the first, violence came easily when justified. Compassion demanded conscious effort, deliberate cultivation. His Saifu had taught him techniques, had shown him how to channel energy and maximize efficiency. But the philosophy underlying those techniques, that Bruce had to learn through living, through choosing, through repeatedly deciding what kind of man he wanted to be when no one was watching. Except now someone was always watching. Fame had stolen privacy, had made every action potential headline, had transformed simple human choices into public statements about character and values. The weight of that awareness settled on his shoulders like familiar burden. He couldn't stop violence everywhere, couldn't save everyone, couldn't reform every person who chose predatory path. But in this moment, with this person, he'd made difference, had demonstrated that strength and mercy weren't opposites but partners. His thoughts were interrupted by a small voice, tentative and young. "Excuse me, are you really Bruce Lee?" He looked up. A boy stood nearby, maybe 8 years old, wearing school uniform and clutching a worn notebook against his chest. His eyes were wide with that peculiar mixture of hope and fear children carry when approaching heroes. Desperate for acknowledgement, terrified of rejection. Bruce smiled, genuine warmth replacing contemplative distance. "I am what's your name?" The boy's face lit up like someone had ignited fireworks behind his eyes. "Tommy, I saw you fight that bad man. You were so fast like in the movies but real." His words tumbled out in excited rush, Cantonese mixed with English, in the fluid code switching common to Hong Kong kids. His hands moved as he talked, mimicking strikes and blocks with enthusiastic inaccuracy. Bruce listened patiently, waiting for the torrent to slow. When the boy finally paused for breath, Bruce spoke gently. "Can I tell you something important, Tommy? Something more important than how fast I can punch." The boy nodded eagerly, leaning forward as if proximity might help him absorb whatever wisdom was about to be shared. "The most important part of what happened today wasn't the fight. It was choosing not to hurt that man more than necessary, and then helping him after. That's real martial arts. Knowing when to stop, knowing how to win without destroying. Can you understand that?" Tommy's face scrunched with concentration, processing concepts that challenged his 8-year-old understanding of justice and heroism. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Like being strong means being nice, too. Bruce laughed, the sound carrying genuine delight. "Exactly like that. Being strong means being nice, too, especially when you don't have to be. That's when it matters most." Tommy grinned, revealing missing front tooth. He held out his notebook and a pen he produced from his pocket. Would you sign, please?" Bruce took the notebook, opening to a page covered in childish drawings of stick figures and fighting poses. He wrote carefully, his handwriting precise and elegant. "To Tommy, Real strength is knowing when not to fight. Bruce Lee, March 1972. He handed the notebook back. Tommy read the inscription, lips moving silently, then looked up with expression of solemn gravity, completely at odds with his missing tooth and scuffed knees. I'll remember. I promise. He bowed, sharp, respectful, mimicking what he'd probably seen in martial arts movies, then ran off toward where his mother waited near the park entrance, waving the notebook above his head like captured treasure. Bruce watched him go, something loosening in his chest. These moments, unscripted, unfilmed, unwitnessed by millions, these were the ones that mattered most, not the box office numbers or the critical reviews, not the choreographed violence or the theatrical philosophy delivered in perfect lighting, but this, one child learning that strength and kindness weren't enemies, one seed planted in young mind, germinating toward possibility he'd never see but could trust existed somewhere in branching futures. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost artificial in their intensity. Bruce stood, collecting his sunglasses from the bench, preparing to return to his other life. The film sets and the interviews, the public persona, and the relentless schedule. But he carried this moment with him. This quiet afternoon when 3 seconds of action had rippled outward into teaching, into mercy, into small boy's promise. He walked toward the park exit, passing the lotus pond one final time. The koi had disappeared beneath the surface, seeking deeper water as temperature dropped. But the lily pads remained, floating on water that reflected skies bleeding. Colors beautiful and temporary and perfect. As he reached the gate, he paused, looking back across the space where violence had briefly bloomed and been pruned before it could spread. The bamboo grove stood serene, innocent, holding no memory of what had occurred within its concealment. The paths lay empty now, everyone having departed to their separate destinations, carrying their separate versions of this story into the wider world. Bruce wondered how they'd tell it, what details they'd emphasize, whether they'd understand what he'd tried to demonstrate beyond simple combat effectiveness, whether the mugger would actually go to Master Chen, would actually choose different path, or whether desperation would drive him back to predatory shortcuts that led nowhere but empty cells and broken conscience. He couldn't control those outcomes, could only control his own choices, his own responses, his own integration of philosophy and action. In 3 seconds he'd stopped violence. But in the minutes after, that's where the real work had happened. That's where mastery lived, in the space between victory and mercy, in the conscious choice to build, rather than simply tear down. Someone passed him on the sidewalk, glancing at his face, then doing a double take of recognition. Bruce smiled politely and kept walking, blending into pedestrian traffic, becoming one body among thousands moving through Hong Kong's evening streets, famous but not separate, skilled but not distant. A man who chosen to intervene when intervention was needed, then chosen again to extend grace when destruction would have been easier. Those choices defined him more than any film role ever could. Now, reading these words, maybe you're thinking about that mugger, thinking about whether he deserved Bruce's mercy, whether offering help to someone who just committed violence wasn't weakness disguised as wisdom. But let me ask you something more uncomfortable. Who in your life have you beaten in argument? Who have you proven wrong, demolished with facts, destroyed with words sharp enough to cut? And when you won, what did you do next? Did you help them understand? Did you offer them a path forward that preserved their dignity? Or did you savor the victory, relish their embarrassment, walk away satisfied that you demonstrated superiority? That's the real question this story asks. Not whether you could defend someone from mugger, but whether you can defend your enemy from yourself. Whether you possess enough strength to win and still extend your hand. Whether your power includes mercy. Bruce Lee had 3 seconds to stop violence, but he had the rest of that afternoon to teach redemption. Both mattered. Both were necessary. Both defined what mastery actually meant. So before you dismiss the mugger's story as simple fable about martial arts intervention, ask yourself, who needs your mercy today? Who have you defeated and abandoned? Who could you help rebuild, instead of leaving broken? That's the lesson that afternoon carried. Not how to fight, but how to win in ways that create something better than simply another victor and another victim. How 3 seconds of action can plant seeds that grow for lifetimes, if you choose wisely. In the minutes after the violence ends, real strength isn't measured in seconds. It's measured in the grace you extend when you no longer have to.